Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the June 1st podcast. Today, I am pleased to be joined by the first ever guest on the June 1st podcast, Erik Creighton, a atmospheric science student at the University of Albany. Erik, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Ethan. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, man. Our story kind of goes back to the beginning of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. That's when I really started getting first involved on WX Twitter. And as crazy of a place it may be, you were the first person I really started following and interacting with that was kind of really local to the area and that also really chased. And I think the first event that I really realized that was May 15th, 2020, which was a fun day.
Yeah.
Particularly for you. You got into some of the real fun stuff. Where were you at? I can't even remember.
It was a little bit north of Saratoga. There's this little small town called Corinth in New York. Yeah, that was an interesting day for sure.
Yeah, your video that day was it on Weather Nation, Weather Channel, or was it on all of those?
I think
I feel like
it was on a lot of them. I was quickly contacted by a licensing group, so I kind of sent that out that night. So yeah, that was pretty interesting for sure.
Yeah, and that's a nice thing too, is that you got reached out by like a licensing group first, rather than just the stereotypical, hey, we're from XYZ local station. Can we have your footage? Glad you're safe. As like baseball size hail or something is falling all around you. I love seeing those interactions on Twitter.
Yeah.
Because it's just like they're almost like they have the character of being almost auto generated.
Yeah, absolutely.
They kind of shoot these things out there, and you're still like riding the adrenaline high almost off of that. So it's like I always think it's really funny, and I don't think like I understand where people come from in terms of like trying to like license footage and stuff like that. And with some of the local stations, I get why they can't pay for it, but at the same time, I think it's somewhat rude that they're like not even making an attempt to trying to make it profitable for people that do this thing, even it albeit a hobby, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little backstory about May 15th, 2020, and I think we'll get into it a little bit more. I rode out this tornadic bow echo with that. It had winds about 70 to 90 miles per hour and some dime-sized hail. And that post that I initially put up was largely what I consider to be my first viral weather tweet, so to speak. And half of my replies were vultures, so to speak, from various news organizations. And yeah, like you said, it was really great that I had a licensing group reach out almost immediately, because that really made things a lot easier, and it kind of kept me from turning down a wrong path. And you made a good point about the local versus national news. I'm a little bit more okay with giving to local these days. Just because they don't have quite the budget, but it's certainly a gray area, and I know not everyone likes to do that.
Yeah, I think I've grown a little softer because I think there has been the push from the chaser community in terms of really getting people the value their work. So I think I'm starting to get a little bit more laxed on it, but definitely like those national programs, they definitely have the resources in order to, shell out a couple $100 for a video. I think the other tough thing is that a lot of people don't really know how to go through the licensing process. And I sure as hell didn't even really realize what went into it. So when I first started, so I don't know. It's just an interesting area in the world we work in, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and it's honestly it is complicated. Even being familiar with the community at that time, I'd never licensed anything before. And before working through that, I kind of had to do some Googling and kind of be like, what exactly, what does this mean? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
it's certainly not something people are used to. So it's pretty easy for someone to not realize what they have their hands on. 'Cause video can be really valuable.
Yeah. I love photography and stuff like that of storms, but I feel like video is where you really capture the true essence of power, especially, like even just straight line winds, for example. Like you don't really realize. I mean, I guess straight line winds is hard to kind of illustrate with a picture, but like a tornado, for example, sometimes those real violent motions, like the classic example that comes to me is like the Wynnywood videos. I mean, just like seeing like that up close, like down at ground level, you don't get really an appreciation from a still photo necessarily per se, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But I think it's, especially in news media, that's really a hot point of contention.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but those Wynnywood videos, people have those telephoto lenses when they're recording, and that view of them looking up the street and watching the tornado come over the road. I mean, that's some of the most incredible stuff I think anyone's ever seen. And when I say incredible, of course, it's horrifying. It's really destructive and terrible, but at the same time, it's absolutely mesmerizing to see that kind of thing, like permanent fixtures to the ground, just looking, they're in the air. It's hard to process that.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And the nice thing about some of those plains tornadoes is that Wynnywood obviously impacted people's lives, and I believe claimed a single life, if I'm not mistaken. But I really got the firsthand appreciation of seeing a tornado in an open field, both on May 18th and the 22nd this year. One in La Mesa, Texas, and the other in just south of Akron, Colorado. And getting to see a tornado in the open field for the first time was really like kind of a spectacle that, you kind of gain that beautiful appreciation. But I know eventually that for the both of us, if we do this long enough, we're eventually going to get to a point where we're going to have to, stumble upon a very unfortunate situation. And I know for me personally, that's something I kind of dread.
Yeah. Yeah. Even with something I believe we'll get to with the Sharon, Connecticut tornado. Even then, we both kind of stumbled onto the damage path, and that was just an EF0, but that was definitely a little sobering, because watching that happen, that excitement kind of turns to, well, hold on a little bit, someone just got impacted by this.
Yeah, man. Let's get into August 2nd, because I feel like that's a very very important area for the intersection of our careers as chasers. That was the first time you and I met in person.
Yep.
Was in, how do you say it? Croton on the Hudson?
Croton on the Hudson. Yeah.
Croton on the Hudson. Okay. So see, I'm not local to the Hudson Valley.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, we met there, and there was some Northeast Chaser convergence, which was like my ever first experience of that.
Yeah, same here.
And yeah, that was such an exceptional day in terms of Northeast chasing standards. Like, I don't think we could have possibly better executed that setup. Real slow moving storms. I mean, storm singular. I mean, that was the only thing that really went off that day was that supercell. I'm trying to remember the environment. Do you remember a lot about what the setup was that day?
Yeah, actually, I did a little bit of an analysis earlier this year, kind of familiarizing myself with it once again. So in the day prior, there were some supercells down in the Mid-Atlantic along the worm front. And that was kind of a precursor, a kind of pilot fish event for us, watching that show up on the Twitter feed, because they had similar conditions that would kind of make their way into our region. And watching that go crazy was like, okay, you know what? Maybe we should start to take this a little bit more seriously, because it's hard to appreciate what the models are throwing out until it starts happening. In the morning of the event, It was gross. This was before the warm front lifted, and it was foggy and just cold and gross. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, well, actually, even before that, at 8 a.m., there was a tornado warning in Pennsylvania from a supercell.
I remember that.
Yeah, yeah, and that started making its way towards the Hudson Valley. And I initially kind of went off that just because storms in the afternoon wouldn't be for much longer. So I just kind of checked it out, and it died. But it was during that time where the warm front moved into the Hudson Valley, and it was quite a change. If you want to kind of describe how that happened.
Yeah, so I remember driving down that morning, and like you said, originally where I was coming down from Western Massachusetts, it was pretty overcast. But once I'm trying to remember because we went like a pretty weird way. We went like 84 and then went like across the Hudson, and then realized that you guys were on the other side of the Hudson. And I was like, yeah, that makes more sense because everything is going to like initialize and then kind of move up that way. So why bottleneck myself and get stuck on one side when the Hudson Valley itself can be kind of its own little storm machine at times? So you got that orthographic lift per se. Actually, I don't even know if that's the actual mechanism at play there, but it seems that, yeah, you can get into it.
There's a couple really cool things that I've done a little bit of research about, and others before me have done some really incredible work studying this. It's a fairly well documented process of valley channeling, and that of course happens in the Hudson Valley, where we have a combination of the wind channels through these valleys, and it advects warmer, moister air. So we have a local area of higher instability, and at the same time, often those winds start backing a little bit more at the surface. So we have both an increase in low-level shear and a little bit of a boost of instability. And sometimes, when a storm's right on the fence of doing something interesting, that can give it the little kick it needs to get there.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because thinking about the June 1st, 2011 tornado, for example, the moment it crossed the Connecticut River, that supercell really started to go completely off. I mean, it was in Springfield where it really fully condensed, and then once it made its way into Munson, it started going up the mountain, maybe losing a little bit of steam, but then the moment it dropped off that other side of the mountain, you get like that vorticity stretching.
Absolutely.
And that thing, and that's when it went, a half mile wide essentially, and went through the center of Munson into Brimfield. So I was just, you brought that back up to me. But going back towards August 2nd, sitting there on the river that day, it was baking hot, stupid humid, and I was starting to get excited. And it was nice because I felt as though that it wasn't that typical northeastern setup where you just have like this marching cold front and wicked forcing, and then boom, everything's linear. So it was a nice change of pace for once.
Yeah, it was really quite interesting. So earlier that day, it was a little bit of orchestrated tracer convergence, non-organic, if you will.
Yeah.
I put it onto Twitter, if there's any storm chasers in the area, a lot of us are meeting here, and it's a great staging area. And of course, part of my reason for choosing that spot was a little bit because it's about 15 minutes from my house, that's certainly convenient. Yeah. But that was a lot of fun getting to meet some familiar faces and some new faces, for sure. And like you said, once we were all down there, it was baking hot. And one of the funny things that I remember from that day, and how things really did change, is that I was standing out there for quite a bit. I was wearing these Birkenstocks. And at a certain point, I took off my shoe, and I had tan lines in the shape of the Birkenstock on my foot.
Yeah.
And my neck was a little burnt, and I was like, wow,
I got sunburned from that day.
Yeah, that's not a problem you kind of generally would think about storm chasing is getting a sunburn, but it does happen.
Yeah, especially on those blue sky busts in Iowa. Anyway, Yeah, I just remember one of the key things that I remember is watching that first cell go up, and it took its sweet time, and we're watching this blip on radar, and I remember the model guidance earlier in the day. It put a consistent, updraft helicity track again and again across that region, and I just thought, because I think it was, not to throw him under the bus, but Nick Isabella was talking about the Pennsylvania target, and I don't think I had the same confidence in it that day. Nick's a great forecaster and all, but I was like, I gut feeling, I was like, this northern cell is going to be the one that does it, and I'm glad we decided to take that gamble.
Yeah, and honestly, if I'm speaking honestly on my part, it was, for me, it was a lot of luck, combined with familiarity with the area.
Yeah.
I knew that, so kind of to premise, before we hit the road, all of us, we all noticed that cell pop up near Poughkeepsie, and
Yep.
we were kind of going back and forth, this little shrimpy rain shower on radar. It's like, should we put ourselves out of position, and kind of throw away the chance to go for that southern target that also looked promising, or should we rush north and fall for the gotcha storm?
Yeah.
And those sucker storms, they do happen, and they can really mess you up. But
they've gotten me before.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. But I felt sufficiently knowledgeable about the region that, should that storm stop looking good, we could make it back south in time for anything else.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we waited a good healthy amount of time too, and by the road network and the terrain in that area gets a little dicey when that thing really started to mature. But I think just because of that nice, convenient, like 15 knot storm motion, if it was even that, I can't even remember what it was that day.
It was crawling, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it was crawling, because I mean, you watch, like, we spent that spot in Amenia for, I don't know how long we were there, for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and that thing, you could still see the mesocyclone by the time we left.
Yeah.
So, but man, working our way up, is that route, what is that route that we worked our way up towards?
That would be Route 9.
Okay.
So that Route 9 gets us over the Hudson Highlands. And you don't want to cross the Hudson Highlands if you're trying to, if you even want to see the sky at all, much less a storm off to the north. You shouldn't go through there. But 9 took us straight up to 84, and then we could kind of blast east a little bit, and kind of blow the storm a little bit more. And I remember calling you on the phone while we were driving up, because you and Colton were able to check maps and stuff and see like where you should end up. Oh, not Colton, Connor. Oh my gosh, yeah.
I was just gonna let it slide.
You're gonna let it slide. That's Connor. Anyways, I remember calling you on the way up, and just checking the radar and seeing it not look so good, and then looking up at the sky and like kind of glimpse through the trees, and you and Connor were able to pick out a spot as we went on. And I remember this point when we were on Route 9, about to decide, should we get on 84? Because that's the moment of truth. Once you get on 84, I mean, you're way out of position.
You're committed.
And I remember, I think I said something about the cloud tops. I looked at the top of the cloud, and remarked that it was very crisp, and seeing those crisp cloud tops in that moment was enough to say, okay, this thing's not done yet. And it's been capable of sustaining itself, and fingers crossed it's just going to keep on doing that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that what really sold me on it, that I was like, oh, this is the one, was when we sent up the drones that first time when we pulled off. Was at we were at like some gas station or restaurant, or I don't even know what it was.
It was right by Stormville, the place where you were earlier.
Yes. Yeah. It was the omen of the day. And for those that don't know, there's a town in New York called Stormville, and they have a little rest stop off of I-84, and it says Stormville, and I took a picture outside of it, and I said, I have a good feeling about today. And sure enough, it paid off. But we sent up our drones, and sure enough, we looked at this storm, and it had, still, albeit pretty far away from our vantage point, probably about 10 miles, I had to say, but, very clear updraft base, and it had the tail cloud coming off the back, and I was like, oh boy, this is going to be fun. And knowing that its presentation on radar, I was like, this is also low precipitation storm mode. So that made me really excited just to see. You can clearly see the updraft base, which is something that we don't get around here, frankly.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. I chase a lot, especially in that area. Anything really, and it's never, you never see something like that. It's usually just like little weak thunderstorms, and you're like, oh, that looks cool. But we sent up those drones. Your massive, unwieldy monster of a drone, and my Mavic Mini right next to it. And I remember looking at my phone on the screen and seeing this nice tilted updraft and this wall cloud with the tail cloud feeding right into it, and the blood started pumping. I was like, all right, we have this incredible environment, these nice curving hodographs, these warm season mini hodographs. We have lots of cape, and now there's a discrete storm, and it looks good, and we're in perfect position. And I remember we were really, really excited at that point because it started to feel like things were coming together at least a little bit.
And it's amazing. I think the luck too really played in our favor. So when we continued north, we got to Dover Plains, and we're watching it, and we literally, like, in real time, I don't think it was tough to tell, or I don't think it was easy to tell, but when I sped up the footage to make it more of like a time lapse kind of deal, you see in between those two mountains where we were at, like you could the storms moving by, and you can see the mesocyclone. Because the mountains, there wasn't that big of a gap, you didn't even realize it was the mesocyclone. But if you watch the footage, it's like there's clear sky that you can see between the mountains, and then it gets dark, and then it got clear again. So it's like that, looking back on it, like I don't think we realized like how like in the moment we were. But then obviously once we got up to Amenia and went down that little farm road up over that little hill, and that thing was cranking at that point, and I was like, holy moly, like this thing's gonna do it.
Yeah.
And that's when I was convinced that this thing was gonna put down a noodle.
Yeah, that was a really interesting period, from traveling from Stormville, where we saw this storm in its early stages showing good organization, and then getting up to Dover Plains, because I'm going to assume basically anyone listening to this isn't really familiar with the road networks there, but we did not take a regular highway after that point. We went through these windy residential roads that went over mountains and had all these curves and stuff, before we got to a north-south highway. And once we finally got into Dover Plains, we pulled off this road with this field in front of us, and then mountains right on the other side of the field, and just the sky was so dark. And there was blue sky to the left of the storm, and this dark base right at the mountains, and the mountains were kind of hiding the interesting stuff that was happening underneath. But it was kind of bone chilling, like it's happening right now.
Yeah.
And I don't remember who pulled up the radar, but for the first time, the radar, it went from this little LP like bean thing to having a hook.
Yeah,
and
it did.
That was the
I
first
think that was
moment.
you, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have some screen grabs in my camera roll, and the storm now looks like a supercell, and that was a really exciting moment. Looking at both the velocity and the reflectivity, were showing pretty clearly that this was not only a supercell, but one that was potentially even fixing to drop a tornado, which is what ended up happening.
Yeah, multiple times,
Yeah.
Which is the crazy thing, a cyclical supercell in the Northeast. What was I going to say? Oh, for those that aren't accustomed to chasing in the Northeast or don't chase in general, the tricky part about the Northeast is that there's a lot of terrain features, a lot of trees, and you deal with population centers. All of those things combined make it for a real interesting time to try to get to storms. And usually you have to commit to one or two places or have places planned out in advance that you're going to view storms from. So for us, kind of just winging it essentially at that point, granted Erik had a good sense of the road network, we were kind of flying blind in terms of exact locations where we were going to be able to see this thing. And it worked out in our favor that both Dover Plains and Amenia had farms, which is something that we love here in the Northeast. Anytime we can find that, that farm here and there, boy, that, it makes our day, especially like a good, at least if the storms are still to your west, like a good western facing farm. And if the terrain works in your favor, you got a downslope, you're on the upper side. Boy, nothing makes a Northeast chaser more happy than that.
Yeah, and that kind of rings back something that I recently discovered. Looking back, when I was doing a statistical analysis of tornado occurrence with relevance to like the elevations that they occurred to, comparing the Hudson Valley and Western New York, and that was kind of to try and see if there was any link between valley channeling and tornado occurrence compared to a place where there wasn't really so much of a prominent valley feature. And while I was doing that project, I took a look at the local topography in the Dover Plains and Amenia area, and there's a nice valley that channels with that on that highway. And not only that, it backs a little bit more than the rest of them do, and so that might have played some kind of role in giving it that extra boost. But we'll never really know the kind of lack of options in that area.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like a safe potential conclusion.
Yeah.
In terms of what really gave it that last kick it needed to put down a tornado. To wrap up that side of the story, we see the tornado touchdown in Amenia, or I should say Sharon, Connecticut, because where we were literally looking at the Connecticut border, and it put down right at the Connecticut border, and we were so elated.
Yeah.
And I if you go to either my channel or the June 1st channel or Erik's channel, you'll hear us freaking out. I don't know did you edit out that audio? I can't remember.
So in my initial post, I didn't have any of the audio. I did a time lapse. So I did both.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
had the camera on the ground, and then I also had the drone time lapse,
that was sick.
That was really incredible. That was a very cool thing to have accomplished, especially for documenting my first tornado.
Yeah. You know what kills me about that moment? I wish I'd put my camera on top of the hill, because I had kind of put it off the side of the road and I had that fence in the shot, and that killed me for days after. And I wish I almost just like had the idea to put the tripod on top of the car, because from where we were standing, I don't remember any real surface winds, because at that point, like, it's not like we have the inflow anymore because we're on the backside of the storm behind that RFD cut. So that also made me realize that for those that are not storm chasers, we're going to have to eventually do an episode where we explain storm terminology, because I know there are a couple of people that have listened to this podcast that are not storm aficionados like Erik and I are. So, I'll have to maybe bring Erik back, because Erik, you being an atmospheric science student, you're the perfect person to talk to when it comes to this terminology.
Yeah, absolutely. And apologize if I've been using a little bit of dense terminology, kind of something that you forget a little.
Cliff Notes version for those that aren't storm aficionados. Basically, this was a very rare setup, and what we mean by setup, basically the ingredients in place for severe weather, something abnormal to the Northeast, and probably something we only see once a year, maybe even less frequent. So for something like this to have happened and us to execute the play just perfectly right in order to see something like that is both a combination of luck and just kind of understanding what needed to be done play-wise in terms of execution, in terms of how the chase was actually conducted. So, yeah, man, August 2nd will always be a personal favorite of mine, and I will forever be attributed to your first tornado now.
Yeah. Yeah. That was definitely quite a day.
Yeah. I want to talk about a little bit. This past summer, you were doing some pretty interesting stuff. I know that it somewhat limited you in terms of being able to get out a lot this year, but do you want to talk about what you've been doing research-wise?
Yeah. So I'm going to guess the interesting part would not be my full-time working at Carvel. That's probably not what you're interested in.
Yeah.
But if anyone has any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer those in the future. Ice cream is very interesting.
Ice cream's very good, but not as interesting as storms.
Yeah. I'd agree with that assessment. In the spring, so I was working at the New York State Mesonet as an intern, and there I had been doing research with snowfall estimates with the Noresk snow model, the NSM, and comparing it to the Mesonet observations. And while I was working on that, I learned how to use QGIS, which is a program that kind of allows you to work with data and plot it. And there's a lot of things you can do there. But learning that skill kind of helped me in the future when I started a project where I kind of studied the effects of terrain, or, it was more of a statistical study of the occurrence of tornadoes with relevance to their elevation. And that study was kind of intended to take a look at whether valley channeling was a prominent feature in the area. But over the summer, what I was doing, I was actually an intern I was a voluntary intern at National Weather Service Albany. And in my time there, we never did get around to doing the research and the case studies that we wanted to do. But something that we were working on, we were doing a lot of severe weather forecasts and TAF forecasting, which certainly has improved how I kind of go about my forecasting process, because when you're presenting a severe weather forecast weekly, you kind of start developing this pattern and a way of going about things, so that you kind of don't have a tendency to first jump to reflectivity and kind of be like, well, the NAM has this squall line, so maybe something will happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like, it's so easy to do that. Like, you just go into, your College of DuPage model viewer or pivotal weather viewer, and it defaults to that precipitation. But, you got to restrain yourself a little bit, especially if you really want to understand what the mechanisms are at play in terms of forecasting. Personally, for me, though it's not necessarily a real professional way of doing it, I've personally adopted Skip Talbot's forecasting style in the videos that he's done. And man, would I love to pick his brain at some point in time, because really diving into it this past year has worked wonders for me. I managed to get a very isolated tornado event out in western New York, just northeast of the Finger Lakes, and that was purely just from the Skip Talbot forecasting method. I got to attribute it getting that tornado thanks to him.
And I think I'm familiar with what you're talking about, but maybe you could tell the people listening a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that was June 3rd this year, 2021. It was Ava, New York, Lee, New York, which is north of Utica. And the night previous, going through the model runs, there was just this very localized parameter space. What I mean by that is that there was this one region that had all the ingredients necessary for a potential tornado. Though they weren't like off the chart levels, they were within the values that I would have expected, a possible tornado. So went out there, and the shear that day was working in our favor, but there was pretty weak mid-level cape, and the lapse rates were weak, and in turn the mid-level cape, mixed layer cape was pretty weak. But surface based, everything at the surface level was looking really good, and that's why I was so confident in terms of actually driving the 4 hours out there in order to see this thing. And the storm was a tail end Charlie storm. By that I mean that it was at the rear, like the southern end of the storm complex, which we like as chasers because that is where you're getting your inflow for a storm, and it's not getting choked out from what's south of it because it's unobstructed air or non-used air. So it gives you the best chance of seeing a tornado in a otherwise linear storm mode, which rarely produces significant or photogenic tornadoes. Granted, this tornado was not photogenic, but and the terrain worked in our favor, and we were able to catch a ghost in the mist per se, a completely unwarned tornado that was off of a very low-topped storm. I don't even think the storm was more than 25,000 feet. I can't even tell you how tall the tops were. Say that 5 times fast. But yeah, man, it was just it was a very unique setup, and I got to attribute, like I said, the Skip Talbot Chaser forecast method.
And that's the motto: play the gradient, not the bullseye, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. That's some really good advice. So something interesting about that event, I could be wrong about this, but I believe that wasn't even a thunderstorm, was it? It was a convective cell, but it didn't have any lightning.
It had lightning. Yeah, it did have lightning here and there, and there was honestly more lightning before the tornado even touched down. So I think I was worried at that point because I thought it was going to fall apart, but I kept going with it because the road network allowed me to. And then there was one point where we were just sitting in front of it and just watching the motion. I mean, that thing, it was just churning. And I said, this thing's going to do something. And that's when I posted that infamous picture of this inflow shelf cloud. And I said, because I saw the motion within the storm, but I couldn't definitively say tornado based off of the view. It wasn't until I brought the footage back home, bumped the contrast, and sped it up that you could clearly see the thing running across the ground. But I posted this picture of a shelf cloud, and everyone got their pitchforks and decided to chastise me for posting a picture of a shelf cloud and calling it a tornado in the tweet. I was still riding off the adrenaline, but it's I laugh about it now, but in the moment I was like, I messed up, and I'm not salty about it anymore. But I thought it was I think I was laughing about it even later that night.
Yeah. Those
I'm not one to hold grudges.
in those times of high adrenaline, it really it's easy to make mistakes.
Oh yes,
especially that kind. And it takes a little bit of discipline and practice kind of to filter out certain things, because a lot of the time, especially on the ground, when we're out there, we use a little bit stronger adjectives than are probably necessary. And I don't think you're the only person who's ever been guilty of that.
No. We can look back a couple of weeks ago, actually, well, more than a couple of weeks ago at this point, but the Matthew Capucci incident, dare I say, I'm not afraid to mention that incident. Was it the best choice? No, but at the same time, I've been in that situation where I was just completely riding that adrenaline high. For those that don't know, Matthew Capucci, he's a well-known person in the weather community who posted a video of him running out into the road, essentially, when there was a tornado crossing the highway in front of him. And he caught a lot of flack for what he did, and rightfully so to some degree. But at the same time, I think it also illustrates the fact that we can get caught up in the moment, and I think it serves a good learning lesson for chasers that, we might catch, this adrenaline high when we're watching a tornado, but at the end of the day, we still got to try to make the right decision. So,
yeah. Gonna be totally honest, I'm not gonna touch this one with a 40-foot pole. I think there were both good and bad things done there, like things that maybe like anyone could do, that maybe people were kind of overreacting a little bit about, but also just lapse in judgment things. But I don't.
Yeah.
It was certainly made out far more than it needed to be.
Yeah.
That's my take on that. But
yeah, that it is a very touchy thing to get onto, but I think it's important to say that it shows that yes, there is like a very emotional side to storm chasing at times, but I think it served because nothing bad happened out of it. Obviously, there were no fatalities or an accident. I think it goes to show that sometimes we really need to take that deep breath in the moment, and there's some chasers that are really freaking good at keeping in the moment. Hank is one that comes to mind. Hank Shima, Pico's Hank. For those that don't know, he's probably the most popular YouTube storm chaser there is that I can think of. Staying that cool in the moment is something that I think maybe it's just something that comes with age or experience, but it's something that I think every chaser should be a little bit mindful of.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that comes with experience, but it's also the people you surround yourself with and like the principles you choose to carry. And from the start, I was hooting and hollering when I saw my first tornado, and thankfully
we both were.
Yeah, thankfully that was only an EF0 and didn't really do all that much damage. But these can be serious events, and it's really important to maintain situational awareness in that time. It's really important to be sensitive to the fact that we're all out here to see something really amazing, but at the same time, this could be someone's worst day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that was something that I thought about. I forgot. I think that came out of one of the other weather podcasts I listened to. I can't remember who the exact person was that stated that observation. But I will reiterate that once I heard and started really reflecting on that as a chaser, it made me a lot more mindful of the way I carry myself, especially in the moment, and not trying to celebrate the tornado. Because it goes again, you get a lot of these characters online that, argue whether or not a tornado should have been an Upton category or a hurricane should have been, a Cat 5 or something. And I think that really goes, yes, I think as weather aficionados, we love the idea of classification and being able to quantify or qualify data. I'm not sure what the right phrase is there, but being able to put something into a category. And obviously I feel like there's a certain fascination with something as the stronger it gets. But if you have something like a Category 5 hurricane or an EF5 tornado, you have to hit something pretty significant the way the Fujita scale works in order to classify something as a Cat 5. Wow. The cardinal sin right there of storm chasing. I just called the tornado a Cat 5. Oh my, was that what that was?
Yeah.
An EF5 tornado. So it has to hit something pretty substantial for it to be rated an EF5, and I don't think that that's the point. And like you said, this is very well a lot of people's worst day, especially when it goes through a population area. I can't imagine, what's a good example? Like Rochelle, for example. Um, that impacted a lot of people's lives. Another one's like the Washington, Illinois tornado. Ones that a lot of people should be like, oh, this should have been this, that, or the other thing. But I think that really defeats the point of that. These phenomena of nature can really upheave a lot of people's lives and take lives. So I think we have to be really mindful about that when it comes to really, arguing. It kind of defeats the purpose of, how we understand storms and the beauty and destructive side of them.
Yeah. All of us are in this hobby or field of interest because weather can be so amazing. And generally, the more extreme it gets, the more mesmerizing it can be.
Right.
But at a certain point, uh, there's a human aspect to it, where maybe people should stop being like, why isn't it a Cat 5? It should be a Cat 5, or man, I really wish it got a little stronger. And it's like,
Yeah,
dude,
that's always one that got me.
like
That
take a
that makes
step
me angry.
back. Like this is not a satellite image of a storm spinning over the ocean. This is landfalling in a community with people, and all of these people have lives and pets and property and all these things. And the thing you're wishing for, just because you're interested in it, we need to be human. And I think Ginger Z has a really
Hmm.
quote about it. I don't know exactly how it goes. I don't know if you know it, but
I know what you're talking about. I
yeah,
don't know the
yeah.
exact quote
It
either.
was it was it was something about, um, definitely just being more human, with our
Yeah,
interests.
yeah. I mean, they don't like you said. Someone that's affected by this storm outside of chasers could care less what number it is at the end of the day, like what category or uh, where it's placed in a scale. For
And
example, for
truly, it
scale.
makes no difference in the world whether
Yeah,
which number it has next to it, because it's still incredibly destructive. And truly, like, from a meteorological perspective, it already is like a marvel.
yeah,
You don't need a number to give it value.
yeah. Every like even some of the weaker storms. I mean, some of the physics that take place and being able just to appreciate it. It doesn't need to be an absolute monster for it to be, mesmerizing. I mean, the Sharon, Connecticut tornado, perfect example of that. That storm was so uniquely beautiful for someone like you and I who doesn't necessarily get to see the best weather all the time in terms of severe weather. Getting to see, the most magnificent supercells, which is something that you and I are both very enamored by. But in its own right, we were very appreciative of this little supercell that in the plains would have probably gone unnoticed. So
Yeah.
that brings me to another question. I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but did you ever have like a defining storm that really put the nail in the coffin in terms of you being a person that loves weather?
For me, I've always, yeah, that's always a really good question. I've always been interested in weather ever since I was a kid. I remember kind of, uh, a long story, but made short. I have this cabin that my family owns, out in the Catskills, and we would get these thunderstorms at nighttime. And I would sneak out, to the windows and watch the lightning at night. And the thunder would shake the whole house. And I always really loved that. And that's something I hold near and dear, to me when I think back about where I started. But as time went on, there were definitely a couple events that really pushed it over. The first one would probably be when there was a tornado warning at my house, and I didn't know what it was. I knew we had the radio on, and suddenly it was interrupted by that classic blaring tornado warning. And I just remember watching all these adults around me get nervous. It's like, why
Yeah.
what can make these adults so nervous? Like, what could that possibly be? What is a tornado? Um, and I asked my dad about it the next day. What's a tornado? Like, what's this EF scale? Like, what is that? And he
Hmm.
explained to his best ability, but I started, taking all the books out of the library, those natural disaster books and
Yep.
top 10 tornado books and all that. And a lot of them I was given as gifts, and I still have those.
Yeah.
And it's just,
I still have them too.
yeah, just like over time learning about all these new things, and like other things, like I think the second defining storm, I would say, would be the what do people call that one in 2011 in October? The
The October snowstorm. I don't
Yeah,
know. That's what we always
October
called it around here.
snowstorm. It was a really high impact snowstorm event where we had really wet, heavy snow and a lot of it. And
Hmm.
I was camping in the woods with the Boy Scouts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and uh, we had to evacuate um, because we started hearing all these trees falling all around us. So
Yeah.
with several inches of wet snow on the ground and all these trees falling and blocking roads, my dad and I and my brother piled into the car and drove home. And it's normally a 20-25 minute drive, and it was about an hour. It was harrowing, and it really, uh, it definitely had an impact on me. And I remember coming home and watching the Weather Channel coverage of it um, until the power went out. And that
Yep.
whole event really just stands out to me just because of that whole experience. It's like, wow, like weather can be really cool and like really impactful. Yeah,
That was an insane event.
yeah, it was really anomalous. And we didn't have Halloween that year in my neighborhood because no one had power and all and the next year, Hurricane Sandy hit, and we didn't have
Yep.
Halloween that year either. And as a kid,
Oh my
uh,
gosh. I didn't even think of that.
yeah, and I
Because
was kind
Sandy
of
wasn't bad up here.
I was having trouble kind of being excited about these storms as a kid. Like, wow, that was a really cool storm, and also I can't get candy.
Yeah.
Like, it's definitely a little bit of a split there. Yeah.
Yeah. Funny part about the October snowstorm. I was at a friend's house when it happened. It was his birthday, and we were sleeping over that night. And he lives like up on a hill that you can see Springfield, kind of from where he lives. And it was still snowing, and we had just lost power at the house there. So we went outside and we were playing in the snow at night. And we were watching the Springfield, like towards Springfield. Obviously, we couldn't see it because of the snow, but we just saw like the glow of it. And probably every, 3 to 5 minutes, there would be a power flash, and then a part of the city would go dark,
Wow.
and then be another power flash, and then like another area would go dark, and then eventually it was just all dark by the end of the night because
That's
everything lost power.
Wow, that's really remarkable, and I can
Yeah.
imagine the kind of impact that would have on you, especially at a
Yeah.
young age. You know.
Well, I mean, at that point, June 1st had already happened. So it's like that
Yeah,
happened earlier in the year. Then this happened. So I was just already like nail in the coffin. I'm going to be a weather guy from now on. So, uh, but it's events like that, man. It's like the light switch moment that so many people have talked about in this community that it's always kind of there. We've all, had these interests in weather. And sometimes it just takes, that extra push to really just, throw it into next gear.
yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, we're definitely we all have it. You know,
yeah,
it's not like out of nowhere it just hits you and you're like, bam, weather. I feel
yeah,
like we all kind of are born with this weird obsession, this interest, and it just takes that event to really just be like,
yeah.
wow. Like this stuff is really cool.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
On that philosophical note, I think we're close to an hour here.
Wow. Goes fast.
Yeah, it does. Well, man, I want to thank you for coming on, and I am sure to have you back in the near future. Maybe once the next storm season or the next big snow event or something rolls around, I'll have to have you back on here and we'll break it down, because there's not too many of us Northeast guys up here. Next guy I think I got to get on is the infamous Northeast chaser himself, Colton Flint, who is he's got a natural knack for it.
Yeah, he
definitely makes both.
Yeah,
he makes the both of us jealous. That's what happens.
He has a knack for making us look bad.
Yeah.
No, he's a true legend.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to plug? Any socials, YouTube, Twitters?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where they can reach you at?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. That would be E Creighton Weather or E Creighton WX, and and I also have a YouTube channel, and that's just Erik Creighton. But you can also find that in the bio of my Twitter. Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on, and I'll be having you back eventually. So, great talking to you today, and everyone, thank you for tuning in, and be sure to catch the next June 1st podcast. Thank you.